The woman was on her knees in the hospital parking lot when Shadow found her. She had her hands pressed flat against the ice, and her scrub top was soaked through in a temperature of 18 below zero, and the file folder she'd been carrying when she fell had scattered across the asphalt in a loose fan of documents the wind was already stealing. She wasn't crying. She had stopped crying somewhere around midnight when the charge nurse had handed her the termination notice, and Dr. Raymond Ashworth had watched from the doorway of his office with the particular calm of a man who believed he had already won. She was trying to stand, and her right hand kept slipping. And the January storm in Millhaven, Montana, had reduced the parking lot lights to diffuse orange smears in the dark. Nobody had come out to help her. She had not expected anyone to. Then a sound cut through the wind, a low, deliberate sound, not quite a bark. And a massive dog pushed through the snowdrift at the parking lot's edge and stopped 3 feet from her outstretched hand and looked at her as if he had been sent. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story moves you, please subscribe and follow it until the very end. What you're about to hear will restore your faith in the people who still exist in this world, and in the ordinary moments where God places the right person at the exact right time. We read every single comment. Cole Merritt was 38 years old and built like someone who had spent 20 years being told the world was hard and had decided to believe it. He stood 6 feet even in worn work boots, with the broad shoulders of a man who still ran 5 miles before the rest of Millhaven woke up. Not out of vanity, but because stopping hurt more than continuing. His hair was dark and close-cropped at the sides, longer on top, and the jaw beneath it was squared and weathered in the way that belongs to men who have spent significant portions of their lives outdoors in places that do not want them there. His nose had healed slightly off-center from a break sustained in Kandahar in 2017, in circumstances he described to exactly no one. His eyes were a pale, particular gray, the color of gunmetal at dawn, and they moved through any room the way water finds cracks, cataloging exits and hands and posture with the quiet, automatic efficiency of a man who had spent too long in environments where attention was not optional. He was not menacing by nature. He was simply a person from whom the habit of readiness had never fully departed, and probably never would. He'd served 8 years as a Navy SEAL, assigned to SEAL Team 7 out of Dam Neck, Virginia, with 3 deployments to Afghanistan and a 4th to Syria that ended early when a vehicle born eyed destroyed the MRAP he was riding in outside Raqqa in November of 2019. He'd been the only man in the vehicle who walked, or more accurately, was carried out. The blast took the full hearing in his left ear, left nerve damage in his right knee, and deposited a fragment of shrapnel inside his left shoulder that the surgeons had decided was safer to leave than to remove. He was medically discharged 6 months later with a Purple Heart and a silence that had traveled home with him the way silence does, quietly, persistently, in the space where easy conversation used to live. He'd come to Millhaven because a cousin had mentioned the property prices, and because he needed somewhere that asked nothing of him, while he figured out what asking something of himself again looked like. 11 months now. He did contract woodwork for a lumber yard on the north end of town, attended a Thursday night veterans group at the VFW with a consistency that had surprised him more than anyone, and was not unhappy. He had Shadow. Shadow was a 5-year-old German Shepherd with a coat that ran from deep charcoal at the spine to warm tan along his flanks and face, thick enough that snow settled in it rather than soaking through. He weighed 82 pounds, lean and enormously powerful in the particular way of working dogs who have been given serious work to do. His right shoulder carried a pale, diagonal scar. Hair grew differently there, showing the path a round had grazed during a vehicle clearance in Helmand Province in 2018, a round that had been meant for the handler walking beside him. He had a titanium crown on his left rear molar from a bite injury sustained during an apprehension in 2019, and when the light caught it at the right angle, it gleamed like something ceremonial, which Cole privately considered accurate. Shadow moved through the world with the clean, deliberate attention of an animal who had long ago learned to distinguish between noise that meant nothing and noise that meant everything. He didn't react to cars or strangers or weather. He reacted to wrongness. In all the months Cole had been navigating the specific loneliness of Millhaven in winter, Shadow had never once reacted to something that turned out to be nothing. It had been Shadow's idea to be in the hospital parking lot at all. Cole had driven into Millhaven that Tuesday evening for the Thursday group. The roads had closed the night before, and he'd come in early to avoid getting snowed in at the property, and had parked on Cedar Street to walk to the diner for coffee when Shadow had turned his head toward the south end of the block, gone completely still, and then stepped off the sidewalk toward the hospital campus without waiting for a command. Cole had followed. He had long since stopped questioning the logic of following Shadow in situations like this. The dog's instincts had a better record than his own. The hospital was Millhaven County Medical Center, a 3-story brick building from 1967, with a newer trauma wing tacked to the east side in 2004, and a parking lot that was nearly empty at this hour, except for the overnight staff's vehicles and the snowplow that made slow, grinding circuits around the perimeter. The storm had dropped 6 inches since noon and was adding to it steadily, and the sodium lights over the parking lot gave the falling snow a flat orange color that was beautiful in a way Cole had not expected Montana winters to be, and had gradually stopped mentioning because no one in the veterans group seemed to find it notable. The cold was the specific, deliberate cold of the northern high plains in January, not wind-chill cold, but the kind of settled, radical cold that moves into the air at dark and changes the character of every surface, every sound, every breath. Cole had been in worse. His left shoulder, where the fragment lived, had its own opinion about Montana January, which it expressed reliably. Shadow was moving through the lot at a trot, nose working. Cole followed at his heel and pulled his coat tighter and watched the dog's ears and said nothing. Then Shadow slowed, turned left around a row of vehicles, and stopped. Alina Vasquez was 29 days from her 32nd birthday and had not been planning to spend those days unemployed. But she was a woman who had learned young that the distance between planning and arriving was rarely as short as it looked. She was small, 5 feet 4 inches, compact and precise in her movements, in the way of people who have spent years navigating crowded hospital corridors without slowing down, with dark eyes that were red-rimmed tonight in a way she would not have permitted them to be on any of the 12-hour shifts she'd just completed. She'd been an RN in the cardiac unit at Millhaven County for 4 years. She was good at her job in the specific way that matters, which is to say that patients trusted her. Not because she was friendly, she was, but that was incidental, but because she was competent and honest, and did not deliver news in a way that left people uncertain about what had just been said. She had a daughter at home, 7 years old, with a babysitter who charged by the hour, and a drawing on the refrigerator that said, "Mommy is a hero." Elena had kept the drawing up after her daughter's father had left, because she had needed to be reminded that someone was certain of this, and it had worked better than she'd expected. She had spent her shift documenting a pattern she'd been building for 3 weeks. 8 patients in the cardiac unit over 14 months, all recovering from the same procedure, a valve repair performed by the hospital's chief of cardiology. 3 had died from post-operative complications. Elena had cross-referenced the charts, noticed the correlation, and flagged it to her unit supervisor in October. The supervisor told her to recheck her methodology. She had, and brought it back in November. In December, she had gone to Dr. Raymond Ashworth directly. Raymond Ashworth was 53 years old and carried the particular confidence of a man who had not been wrong, in his own estimation, in recent memory. He had been the hospital's chief administrator for 6 years, before which he'd practiced cardiology for 14 years, with a reputation he'd spent considerable energy building. He sat on the county hospital board, had been appointed to the State Medical Association's Ethics Committee the previous spring and was on a first-name basis with 2 members of the Millhaven City Council. His office had a leather chair that cost more than Alina's monthly rent. He had let Alina sit in the lesser chair in December and listen to her findings with the expression of a man waiting for the part that becomes relevant to him and not finding it. Then he had told her, with a patience that was itself a form of dismissal, that correlation was not causation, that the cases she was concerned about were consistent with known complications, that her methodology showed gaps, and that he would be happy to have the quality assurance team review her documentation. He had told her this the way a person tells a child that the noise they heard was just the wind. She'd heard nothing from quality assurance. She had kept documenting. She had requested the files of 2 additional patients she'd identified in the past month. On the Tuesday morning of her shift, she had found a notation in her personnel record indicating an anonymous complaint about her conduct with patients, a notation that had not existed the previous week, and which she could not locate the source of, and which an HR representative had told her that afternoon, very carefully, was now part of an open review process. She had worked her shift anyway, 12 hours, because the patients needed her, and because she did not know how to perform the act of walking out on people who needed her and still be who she was. At 11:40 that night, the charge nurse had brought the envelope. She'd been trying to get to her car when she fell, and the file folder, copies she'd made of her documentation, because she had known since December that her documentation was going to matter, and she was not a person who prepared poorly, had gone everywhere, and her right hand had slipped twice on the ice, and she was getting up when Shadow stopped 3 feet away and looked at her. She looked back at him. She had grown up with dogs. She was not frightened. "Hi," she said to the dog, in a voice that was approximately steady. Shadow took 1 step forward, sat down in the snow in front of her, and waited. Cole came around the row of vehicles and saw her on the ground and moved to her without hesitation. Because there is a category of person who does not ask preliminary questions when they see someone on the ground in a parking lot in 18 below zero, and Cole Merritt was that category. He got a hand under her arm and brought her to her feet in a single movement and steadied her until she found her balance. She pulled away gently, but immediately, the way competent people do when they've been helped past the crisis point and need to reassert their own footing. He respected this and stepped back. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No." She was looking at the scattered documents, calculating the wind's trajectory. "I need to get those." He was already moving. He caught the pages one-handed and two-handed across 6 feet of parking lot, bending and reaching with his knee, doing what it always did in cold weather. And when he'd gathered what remained, she held out her hands for them without ceremony. He gave them to her. She counted pages quickly, visibly concerned about what was missing. "Thank you," she said. She was shivering now, visibly, and her scrub top was soaked. "He's beautiful," she added, looking at Shadow. Shadow had not moved. He was still sitting in the snow between them, watching her with the steady, unblinking attention he brought to things that needed attending to. "What are those?" Cole said, not intrusively. He'd noticed the header on the top page, patient initials, procedure dates, outcome notations in a systematic format that looked like something someone had built carefully over time. She looked at him. The red-rimmed eyes measured him in the practiced way of someone who has spent years reading people under pressure and needed the information quickly. Whatever she found seemed adequate. "Evidence," she said, "of something that's been killing people." She said it matter-of-factly, the way she delivered news plainly, without the drama that wouldn't help anyone. "I was just fired for finding it." Cole said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Come inside somewhere. You're in scrubs in a snowstorm. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're hypothermic in 10 minutes if you stay out here." She started to object, and then Shadow stood up, stepped to her side, and pressed the full weight of his head against her left hip and just held it there, warm and entirely certain. She looked down at him. Something in her face shifted, very slightly, in the way of someone who has been managing alone for long enough that being offered weight to lean against is unexpectedly difficult to process. "There's a diner on Cedar," Cole said. "It's open." They sat in a corner booth at Murphy's Diner with coffee. Shadow lay under the table at Elena's feet, a habit he'd developed without being asked and that Cole had never discouraged, and she told him everything. Systematically, in the order it had happened, with the documentation laid out in the sequence she'd built it over 3 months. She was not asking for his help. She had the manner of a person who had been carrying something too heavy for too long, and had discovered, almost incidentally, that someone was willing to sit across from them while they set it down. She told him about the 8 patients, the 3 deaths, the procedure correlation and the anomalous complication rates and the notation in her record, Ashworth's dismissal in December and the quality assurance silence and the fabricated complaint and the envelope. She told him about her daughter at home and the babysitter she was paying by the hour and the mortgage she had 3 months of savings to cover. She told him these last things not as complaints, but as facts, because she was a person for whom facts were what you worked with. Cole listened without interrupting. When she was done, he was quiet for a moment. "The 3 who died," he said. "Their families. Have they been told it might not have been necessary?" "No," she said. "I don't think they know to ask." "I know a lawyer," he said. "Veteran I served with. Billings, medical malpractice and whistleblower." She won. Shadow lifted his head from Elena's feet and looked up at Cole, and then lay his chin back down. Elena looked at the documentation between them. "He'll come after me harder if I escalate." "Yes," Cole said. She was quiet for a long moment. "My daughter needs me employed." "Your daughter needs you to be her mother," Cole said. "Those aren't the same thing." He said it without weight, just as a fact, and immediately looked prepared to be wrong about whether she needed to hear it. She looked at him. "Why do you care?" Not hostilely. Genuinely, he considered this. "Because your dog came to find me," he said. It wasn't entirely accurate. Shadow was not her dog, but she understood what he meant, and she almost smiled, which was the first time that had come close to happening since 10 that morning. What followed was built over 2 days while the storm finished and Millhaven returned to its rhythmic cold. Cole reached his friend in Billings, Andrea Wren, Captain Usson retired, who answered at 7 in the morning without complaint. Elena scanned everything at the Cedar Street Library and sent it, and Andrea called back 4 hours later and said, "This is actionable. Significantly actionable." She took the case on contingency. On the morning of the 3rd day, Cole drove to the hospital. Not with Elena. She was at home, with her daughter, being told the story of where the babysitter money had gone, and that things were going to be different for a little while. Cole went alone. Shadow walked beside him through the main entrance and across the lobby, and the nursing staff at the front desk tracked the dog with their eyes, but said nothing. Because a man who walks through a lobby with that kind of stillness tends to encounter fewer obstacles than one who appears uncertain. Dr. Raymond Ashworth was in his office at 9:15 in the morning, at his desk, when Cole knocked once and opened the door. Ashworth looked up from his computer. He was a tall man with silver at his temples, and a way of sitting behind a desk that suggested a relationship with the desk that was essentially proprietary. He took in Cole and then Shadow with the assessment of someone who is accustomed to sizing up, who has walked in and determining, quickly, that they do not represent a serious threat. "I have a 9:30, Ashworth said. "Whatever this is needs to go through scheduling. It won't take long," Cole said. He was standing still, and his voice was level, and he had not yet taken a step inside the door. Shadow sat at his heel, and his ears were forward. and he was watching Ashworth with the particular undecorated attention he brought to things that had already revealed their nature. Cole introduced himself. Name, rank, SEAL Team 7. 3 combat deployments. The fourth that ended early. He delivered it the way he'd been trained to brief command, as context, nothing more. Then he told Ashworth what he knew. The patient files. The procedure correlation. The 3 deaths. The documentation that had left the building Tuesday night in a folder scattered across the parking lot, while the woman who'd built it had been trying to stand up on the ice. He told him that the Montana Board of Medical Examiners had received a formal complaint the previous afternoon, that the state health department had been contacted, that an attorney in Billings was preparing civil suits on behalf of the families of all 3 deceased patients, 2 of whom had already agreed to proceed, that he had called a journalist at the Billings Gazette at 7 that morning, and the documentation was already on its way. He said all of this without heat, without volume, without anything in his face or voice that could be called anger. He had not come here in anger. He had come because this was the part of the sequence where the person responsible needed to understand the full scope of what they were standing inside. And because someone had to stand in this office and make that clear. And because he was the person who had ended up in a parking lot on a Tuesday night following a dog through a snowstorm. And this was apparently what that meant. When he finished, Ashworth was quiet for a long moment. "You have no standing in this," Ashworth said finally. "You're not a patient. You have no professional relationship with this institution." He'd reassembled something that had briefly looked like composure, but was smaller than it had been before Cole had come through the door. "Whatever that nurse told you, she didn't ask me to come here," Cole said. "That's probably worth noting." Ashworth's jaw moved slightly. "My attorney will be very busy," Cole agreed. "You should call them." He paused. Today, Shadow stood up. He did not move forward. He simply stood, and the standing was itself a recalibration of everything in the room, and Ashworth's eyes went to the dog with the particular attention of someone who has just recalculated the composition of what they're looking at, and found the answer less comfortable than the previous version. Cole turned and walked out. He did not look back. The story in the Billings Gazette ran 14 days later. Not dramatic by newspaper standards, a hospital administrator, a statistical anomaly, a nurse terminated during an open review. But the state health department's inquiry was already underway when it ran. The Board of Medical Examiners moved more slowly, the way such things do. But the complaint was on record, and the documentation was in their hands. Raymond Ashworth was placed on administrative leave 3 weeks after Cole's visit to his office, pending the outcomes of both investigations. The hospital board hired an independent firm for a simultaneous internal review. 2 of the 3 families Andrea Wren had contacted filed wrongful death suits that winter. The 3rd family needed more time, which Andrea told Alana was entirely understandable, and that the door was still open. Alana Vasquez was reinstated to her position in the cardiac unit in March, following the completion of an independent HR review that found no basis for the conduct complaint in her record and formally expunged it. She was not offered an apology in writing. She did not require one. She was offered her job back, and she took it, because the patients on the cardiac floor needed her, and because she still could not perform the act of walking out on people who needed her and still be who she was. 8 months after the parking lot, Cole drove to a September barbecue at the VFW that the Thursday group had organized. Alina had come with her daughter Maya, 8 now, a new gap in her front teeth, who immediately identified Shadow as the most important thing at the gathering and spent 45 minutes learning his hand signals with Cole's patient instruction. Shadow performed each one with enthusiasm Cole privately noted he did not usually bring to adults. Maya declared him her best friend. Shadow accepted this by lying down and placing his head in her lap, an endorsement he gave to very few people, and which Maya received with the full seriousness it deserved. Cole's knee still ached in cold weather. The fragment in his shoulder still made itself known when the pressure dropped. He still woke sometimes at 4 a.m. from dreams he couldn't fully remember, and had learned to move through the residue by getting up, making coffee, and sitting with Shadow until the light came. He went to the VFW on Thursdays. He did the woodwork. He drove the roads he had come to know. He was not waiting for something to begin. He was learning, in the slow way of people who have had to relearn things they thought they already knew. That beginning was not a moment, but a direction. Sometimes miracles don't arrive as thunder from the sky. Sometimes they walk into a parking lot on a January night through 6 inches of snow following a sound that no one else heard. And they sit down in front of a woman who has stopped crying and wait to be useful. God does not always place us in the right story. Sometimes He places us in the right parking lot at the right time, with a dog who already knows where to go. In the everyday accumulation of an ordinary life, the long shifts, the documents that matter, the decisions made in quiet offices where power has been comfortable for too long, there are people who have not been left behind, but who do not yet know that anyone is coming. They are in the lobbies and the parking lots and the corner booths of diners where the coffee is always on. They are counting what they have left and trying to stand up on the ice. The only question is whether the person in the truck pulls over when the dog tells them to. If Alina's story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that what they know matters and that someone will come. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And have you ever stayed in a fight you weren't sure you could win? Tell us about it. Your story might be the one that gives someone else the courage to keep their documentation and not walk away. If you believe in stories of service, loyalty, and the kind of courage that doesn't wear a uniform but deserves to, please subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one. May God bless you, protect your family, and place someone in your path when you can't stand up alone.